Could you tell me a bit about Helen Blackburn, who she was and her background?
Helen Blackburn is actually a really interesting figure. She's certainly not a well-known household name today, but she had a really interesting and important contribution to make to the women's movement during the 19th century. Born in 1842, she becomes quite quickly well known for her contribution. She was very much a committee woman. She did a lot of excellent service, particularly at a regional level, building up suffrage campaigns. She did a lot of work in Bristol, for instance, in the 1880s, organising very much grassroots, door-to-door campaigning, bringing in local women who would recognise the importance of the work that the Bristol Suffrage Committee was doing. She became a recognised author, and in particular, she actually provides some very important early histories of the suffrage movement published just after the turn of the 20th century. So she's very much interested in recording in detail the history, the trajectory of the women's movement across the 19th century. So Blackburn makes a very important contribution in terms of the written record of the women's movement. In fact, in 1902, she publishes a book, Women's Suffrage, that really outlines in detail the development of the women's campaign across the mid to late 19th century. And so she plays an integral role in recording the development of the suffrage campaign. She's also the editor of the English Woman's Review, a feminist journal. She's playing an important part in these debates, particularly through the written word, and they remain for us really important sources when we think about the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, that emergence of the women's movement, and in particular the relationship between grassroots campaigning. She was, as I mentioned, very much involved in Bristol in the 1880s, up to the mid-1890s, so very much involved in the grassroots level, but she's able to cast her eye nationwide, as it were, and to see what's happening nationally, and also the links internationally as well. So she's very much at the heart of recording the development, the trajectory of the women's movement.
So how useful are her writings as a historical source for looking at the women's suffrage movement?
In particular, as a historian, I'm often drawn to the articles that she wrote for the English Woman's Review. I think there's some really fascinating stories there, some of the articles that really bring to the fore the ideas, the ideological developments, questions around equality that are being thrashed out in terms of all sorts of debates. And we can take a journal like the English Woman's Review and really drill down into particular debates, for instance, around the Contagious Diseases Act, questions of temperance, for instance, which was often recognised by feminists as a cause that merited their attention. They often saw, for instance, that women bore the brunt of the negative impact of alcohol. So there's a lot of connections that a source like the English Woman's Review can really reveal to us, the connections, the debates and so on. So very much Blackburn was involved in these circles as editor.